My name is Michaela Bjork, and I'm a professor here in the School of Education at the University of Redlands. My colleague Brian Shrest and I are the co-founders of the organization Inland Empire Educators for Social Justice. The IEESJ is committed to talking about and taking actions towards more equitable practices in education at large. As the co-directors of the Center for Educational Justice, Brian and I lead workshops with educators who want to challenge the systems that create and sustain inequitable practices. We believe that the field of education is a platform to celebrate differences, have open and meaningful dialogue, and to raise awareness about the contradictions that inform our values as educators and community members. Today, I'm going to offer some tips on how to cultivate community within the field of education and beyond. My hope is that you watch this video and feel uncomfortable. That's right, uncomfortable. Because as you will learn from this workshop, discomfort is the touchstone of growth. I also hope you feel inspired by at least one idea that I present today. As you watch this video, your assignment, should you choose to accept it, is to take note of when you feel uncomfortable. What happens in your body when you feel uncomfortable? Where does your mind go? Try to observe yourself rather than judge or attempt to change how you are feeling. Just sit with it. Additionally, take note when you feel moved or inspired by something. What happens in your body? How do you know you are inspired? Observing ourselves in the simple but not easy way is a great tool to use and model in your classrooms and communities to cultivate a sense of relatability and belonging. Please view this video as a starting point rather than a tutorial. One of the most important messages that I like to share with educators is that this is not a process that can be perfected or graded. It is one that will continue to evolve and grow with you, your students, and communities as your needs change and their needs grow. There is truly no one-size-fits-all in this message. Take what resonates with you and leave the rest. Establishing a mindful and engaging classroom and school community is something that takes time, intentionality, and the willingness to sit with the joys and discomforts of teaching, learning, and growing, regardless of your age. Take a moment to think about a space that felt inviting and encouraged you to ask meaningful questions, regardless of the answers. What qualities did the person or people have that provided such a safe space? What impact did that space have on who you are today? Research shows that we are more likely to learn new information and make meaning with the world around us when we feel a sense of belonging. In order to provide our students and each other, fellow educators, a space where there is a cultivated sense of belonging, we must be willing to be vulnerable, to model vulnerability, and to encourage vulnerability. Here is an example of an exercise that I have used on the first day of class, as well as the first day of a workshop with educators. Asking people to share the story of their name is an invitation into so much more than someone's name. This question evokes memories, feelings, origin stories, stories of traditions, stories of culture. It also allows space for people to pronounce their name as they want it to be pronounced. If you choose to use this activity, take note of the unique stories that accompany the answers to the questions. It is in these stories that people can actively listen, connect, relate, and empathize. These are qualities that we want to nurture in our students and in each other as educators. Another question I like to ask students and educators is, what does community mean to you? The late Bell Hooks wrote that in order for us to build authentic communities within the system of education, we must be willing to dismantle the power dynamic of us versus them. Paulo Freire posited a similar notion, which questions the idea that the teacher holds all the knowledge and delivers it to the unknowing students in the banking method. This does not build community. In fact, Hooks and Freire would argue that teaching and learning methods that value domination are detrimental to everyone involved. It is when our focus turns away from dominator culture and towards diversity of thought, valuing individually unique lived experience, this is where our communities thrive. Another question I ask my students and educators is, what do you need to cultivate a community? Students might half-jokingly respond with food or music, but inevitably they express a similar desire to have a space where they can ask questions without being judged, a place to be curious, a place to say, I don't know, and have that be absolutely okay. Students and educators alike have expressed the need for support, clear communication, compassion and acceptance of imperfection in order to cultivate an authentic classroom and school community. As an aside, food and music are at the heart of many strong communities. So if your students do respond with those, consider ways to incorporate both in your classroom. I played music for the first 5 minutes of class as students transitioned from their previous classes. When the music stopped, they knew it was time to settle in. There were rich discussions that came from the music choices, an unintended consequence of a community building tool. In his TEDx talk, teacher and skateboarder Dr. Tay highlights that skateboarding is mostly about failing and trying again. Skateboarding is also about learning new things from a place of fear and curiosity and expecting not to get it on the first try. He posits that the act of learning and education at large would benefit from the spirit of imperfect learning, trial and error, and practice. If skateboarding isn't your jam, consider this quote from Bell Hooks. What Dr. Tay and Hooks ask us to consider is how the role of fear, and specifically the fear of failure, inspired by what Hooks names dominator culture, is what prevents us from cultivating community. Fear tells us that unless we do it right, we don't belong. Fear tells us that if we do not have the same values or shared beliefs, that we don't belong. The panacea to this detrimental ideology is to embrace our differences, hold space for difficult conversations, and remain open to ideas outside of our own. By taking these actions, we will experience discomfort, but just because we are uncomfortable doesn't mean it's wrong. In the world of mindfulness, sitting with discomfort is the touchstone of growth, and at its foundation, education is all about growth. We have lived through a global pandemic, quarantine for over 2 years. We have witnessed and been a part of political, social, and economic breakdowns and breakthroughs. Rebuilding our educational communities is requiring more energy, more time than ever before. And yet, educators and students alike feel like they are depleted of energy and time, feeling the pressure to get back on track, to meet pre-COVID standards in a post-COVID world. The fear of failure is palpable in the workshops that we lead. So then, what can we do to face the fear and find hope? Here are some questions we discuss with educators in our community building workshops. What has our community meant to us during this time? What do we need from our communities currently? What do our students need from their community? What overlaps in your needs and your students' needs? One of the most important notions to keep in mind as you are rebuilding your communities is that your needs and your students' needs are more similar than you might imagine. The good news is that the more in touch with your fears and limitations you are, and the more willing you are to be vulnerable and express them as a way to model to your students what it looks like to be vulnerable, the more likely they are to feel safe to express their fears and limitations. This is a solid first step in building a trusting, safe community. The invaluable nature of being willing to be vulnerable applies to all of our relationships: teachers, administrators, guardians, parents, and partners. Community building and rebuilding happens when we are willing to sit with discomfort, relate to one another in an honest and meaningful way, and accept failure and imperfection as opportunities to grow. I hope I have given you some helpful tools to use in your classrooms, schools, and communities at large. Building and maintaining a supportive, authentic community, much like teaching and learning, is a lifelong commitment, with plenty of room to make mistakes, learn from them, and grow. Be patient with yourselves and each other as you practice these tools imperfectly in your own communities. The process of community building is much more important than the end product. In fact, the process of community building lays the foundation of a healthy community. It cannot be rushed. Much like learning to skateboard or any other skill, it requires time, patience, and commitment.